It's This Week in X at the morning after the Hellfire Gala with Wave X issue number 3 on the 23rd of June, 2021. What are all of our initial reactions to this morning after, starting with Tyler?
This issue is all about morality, or the lack of.
Harry.
I liked it, but it felt like a big step down.
Fariha.
This is the issue I have been waiting for my whole life. And you, Peter?
I think Wave X has lost its way in the typical pitfalls that Spurrier falls into. All right, folks, let's get into a full discussion of Wave X number 3. We are here to get fully into the plot details of Wave X number 3, and that means we are going to fully spoiler it. We're going to talk about the other X-Men issues out this week, other things happening in and around the Marvel Universe. And I'm excited because we seem to have some disparate takes on this one, which always leads to a very interesting discussion. A brief content note for Wave X: we are going to talk frankly about sex, sexuality, and sexual positivity over the course of this discussion. So if that's something that you do not feel safe being a part of the discussion of, we understand, and we will see you again next time on This Week in X. For Wave X number 3, we're going to begin with Tyler to get a fuller initial reaction without, as I always warn us, getting too deep into the plot, because we certainly have a lot to talk about there.
I mean, just when you think it could not be any more worse on Krakoa, this issue happens. I mean, I like that this book not only explores the shortcomings of Krakoa, but also shows the fallout from a failure to address or even simply being aware of such issues to begin with. As a little bit of an aside, this book also reward people who reads the entire line of X books while being accessible to people who just read this book, which, I mean, honestly speaking, during the reign of X, a lot of titles do not do that. They sacrifice they sacrifice people who actually read across the line and just focus on people who collect one line itself, which I think is something that needs to be corrected, if only for myself. Harry?
I feel like the first 2 issues kind of had a stronger cohesive message and kind of execution. This felt a bit more all over the place, and just not a lot of it worked for me, on a deeper level that I had from those first 2 issues. This did feel like a less focused Spurrier, which can happen often. I like him a lot, but when it's a little off kilter, you can really feel it, and that's what this feels like. So I liked it, but it just feels different.
All right, Fariha, you were our most enthusiastic positive on this. Tell us a little bit about that.
I'm beginning to realize that Way of X and New Mutant is the book for me, because this does not deal with, because at the end of the day, why are we creating the mutant nation? Like, what's the purpose of it? It's for the mutants to live happily. And New Mutants and now Way of X has shown the decisions that the councils have made have not worked across the board. And this is another version of it, that the 3 laws that was created is not working for them. And this is supposed to be a New Mutant era, a New Mutant thing. But guess what? We got Mars! Nobody cares. They don't care. Lost doesn't care. Lost doesn't care. That weird looking chick from New Mutant, she doesn't care. Anole doesn't care. None of them care. And the thing is, who are you doing it for then? Who are you doing it for? You're leaving the very same people you're supposed to be saving and protecting, and you're doing it. You're just, you're settling them with weird rules and no way to save themselves. I felt like this is what it feels to live in America. And this is in full display, written by a British man. And I am here for it. There was a lot of things. There was some things that didn't work, but overall, I was just blown away. And then the very first page over here shows why the Hellions were not invited. In a lot of ways, it worked really well for me.
I was so hyped the first time I read it. It really hit, I think, in a similar way to Fariha. It hit a lot of beats that I've been waiting for an X-Men book to hit, and we're going to talk about all of them. But then when I reread it to make my notes, much of it doesn't really hang together for the characters. or for the direction some of these plots are going into, it kind of feels like that thing about Spurrier that I never used to like before the last couple of years, where I really feel like his writing has become so much tighter. And I've read a lot of his writing. It just feels like he made this list of things he wanted to hit, some of which were a little unusual or a little funny or a little bit button pushing. And he hit them kind of regardless of how it plays for these characters. So we were going to have sex, and we were going to have sex positivity, and we were going to have sex negativity, and we are going to have abandoned babies, and we were going to have and then like the way that it got deployed to the characters it got deployed to kind of really rubbed me in a negative way. And I think that I still came out probably net slightly positive on it, but I have seen a lot of people who found a lot of the things in this issue to be really negative, a net negative, ultimately really traumatic. And it makes me really question, like, can you be this glib about something that is so intersectional for so many different identities that people see of themselves in a book? You know, Spurrier got away with being this glib and even more glib in his Hellblazer run because he's A, on the inside of that as a British guy, and B, it was kind of all of it was punching up at the British culture, at Brexit, at monarchy, at all of those things. So he could get away with putting things in like sex with mermaids, right? Like that's fine. But here, it turns out that a lot of it kind of winds up punching down and also being a little incoherent. And that's where Spurrier's really on a knife edge of just being a bad writer for me. So it's like, I think we're going to get into some of that in our discussion. And if you liked it, I'm happy that you liked it, as Fariha did. I think there were many positive things, but there's a lot of things I think dragging it down for me.
So can I start with something?
Yeah,
exactly
please do.
What you said, like, you know, there's like a positive or negative and stuff like that. But I feel like this is one of the reason a lot of the issues in America is not getting solved or not going anywhere, because people always try to hold back. People always doesn't necessarily put everything out there in the same conversation.
Yes.
And it gets like just all over. And I absolutely love the fact that over here, everything was so messy. Because the thing is, there's like two sides of everything. And like, you know, in a way that the fact that how they were abandoned and how it's not necessarily working for mutants are kind of presented in a way that felt really real life. And the thing is, I feel like even with the third issue of this series, Nightcrawler is still in the process of collecting information.
Mm-hmm.
And I felt like this was the information he needed to know in this messy way that, hey, nothing's working. I have a feel like, you know, I say that put him in like a Vita Ayala's New Mutant next, and then see the other horror side of that. Like that's, I think to me, that's why it kind of connected with me more, because it's like, yeah, it's nothing's working. Like everything's broken, you know?
Well, let's stick on that Nightcrawler beat for a round of discussion here. It's the morning after, and we really get the sense that the reason Nightcrawler has been so drunk across all of the books, and it's really fun because we get to see the reverse angle of almost all of his drunken scenes here, and a very clever bit of storytelling from these folks, is that he really just feels burdened with all of this information he's assessing, information he's collecting, trying to figure out how to espouse the rules of Krakoa in a way that is moral, but in a way that can actually be followed, and that he overindulges, you know, and that like the decadence is a shield for him to kind of put off these worries or to drown these worries. It's a really interesting beat to get a morning after, and I feel like a lot of the people on this morning after are feeling the effects of trying to drown their worries in a lot of different ways. But let's stay focused on Nightcrawler here. Starting with Tyler, is this in character for Nightcrawler? How do you perceive this as his function on Krakoa?
Okay, for Nightcrawler, I think he is having, well, since almost I think issue 1, he's having a sort of a crisis in faith, or something. So here he has something which he literally learned hours before the start of the gala, and he couldn't tell anyone, and he has to be dressed up nicely and mingle as if nothing is wrong. So I feel like in some ways it is I mean, it rings kind of true to me that this is this is in character. And like Peter sort of briefly mentioned earlier, I love how that his appearance in many books is
Mhm.
getting reflected here, and some of it is exactly the same. For example, the Howlin scene.
Oh,
Um,
loved it.
yeah, Spiro and Wells definitely pass each other notes on that scene because the word balloons are exactly the same. So, like, Nanny said the same thing, Sinister said the same thing, Kurt said the same thing. And then in the Wolverine scene, the Beast scene, which is in Wolverine, it is similar in that, Kurt basically poured his drink onto Laos. And the thing that deviated the most was in the Excalibur scene. So that was slightly different. And then in the sword scene, it is very similar as well. Um, there is before we move on to the after the morning after, there is one scene with Kate which is really suspicious because I think Kurt caught Kate in the hatchery during Hellfire's Gala. I believe that is a hatchery. So what is Kate doing there?
Yeah, it's the one panel that I was like, what's going on here? And especially since it came right after that Rachel panel, which, if I'm not mistaken, I don't think we've seen the Rachel
No,
panel yet,
we have not
which
seen the Rachel
makes me
panel.
think there's still a little bit more drunk Kurt to come in X Factor next week.
Factor.
Yeah.
And we have not, and I don't think we saw the very first panel with Pixie and Magic, or the panel with Dazzler.
Harry, what do you think about Nightcrawler here? Is this the Nightcrawler you know and love? And whether it is or it isn't, what do you think about this version of Nightcrawler?
Okay, so this is not, I've not read a ton of Nightcrawler, but like from what I've read, he's never been particularly like concerned about sex in this way, like getting kind of like troubled by the notion. But I think this book is also just making the case that he's just like experiencing this kind of doubt anyway, so he's making different choices than usual. That said, it's still like I feel a kind of more shallow depiction of like maybe like a religious person's view of like that kind of sex or what have you, or that kind of activity. I don't know, it didn't really feel that deep or that like interesting as compared to the last two issues, which really did. So it didn't really work for me. But I'm fine like staying on this track and seeing what happens next. I can just it's new characterization for him, but that's about it for me.
Well, the thing that really stuck out to me is that I'm seeing a lot of people who know Nightcrawler really well, who are very well read, have really vehement responses to how he's being used here. And one voice I want to point people specifically to is Anna Pipard. She's a doctorate in literature. She hosts Oh Gosh, Oh Golly, Oh Wow, I think it's Gosh Golly Wow, which is the Excalibur podcast. And she really knows her Kurt Wagner, and she edits a magazine or a publication called Super Sex that's about sex in superhero stuff. So she's really the expert you want to be listening to here. And she writes for Comics XF. She has a wonderful Twitter, and I really encourage you all to go and listen to her on this topic. And I went and did that. But here's my take that's purely my own crisis take on this. Who has Nightcrawler even been for the past decade, right? He was dead, he got resurrected, and who has he really been since that resurrection? We can say that there was this old Nightcrawler who was so romantic, who was such a ladies' man. And we can say that there was this old Nightcrawler who was very devout. And we can say that they were both the Nightcrawler and they both intersected. But I think that Nightcrawler has been, to borrow a line from another piece of media we've all been consuming this week, he really feels like he's been charged with a glorious purpose here on Krakoa. He is meant to be looking after their whole culture. This is a level of responsibility that Nightcrawler has never had before. And we have seen him struggle with the idea of responsibility on multiple occasions when he's been made a leader or co-leader of the X-Men team or the Excalibur team, although of course he eventually matures and becomes quite effective in that way. So I actually think it's very in character for him to be working with this almost religious awe of the fact that he is meant to tend to the morality of this whole society. And that is causing him to work at cross purposes to some of who he knows himself to be. Those of us, and this is immigrant chat, as we love to point out, where three of us have been through multiple cultures different than the ones we originally grew up in. When you are placed in a new culture, sometimes you act very much in line with your values. Sometimes you can act very much counter to your values as you try to find your place in it. And I think that this is an incredibly real take on what it means for Nightcrawler to be saddled with all this. Even if nobody told him he had to be, he's the person who takes that level of responsibility on. So no, I'm not ready to say this is the wrong way to write Nightcrawler, or this is a grinding my gears, or because I think that that kind of roots me in saying that I need Nightcrawler to always be the Nightcrawler that he was from like 1985 to 2005. And I just don't, I want characters to grow and change. And I also think that he's changed in the past decade. And I also think Krakoa has changed him. So if we get to the end of this whole Way of X arc, and it turns out that Nightcrawler is continuously really feeling transgressively not Nightcrawler to me, I will be ready to comment on that. But a lot of my perspective on this issue is like, I just don't know if we're far enough yet to start saying if people are being mischaracterized. Do I think he gets some ridiculous lines here that don't feel very Nightcrawlerly? Yes. But I'm talking about more of his moral arc in Way of X, and that's where I really come out feeling. So I want to toss back to Fariha since she started us on this before we move on to the next topic.
So the thing is, this is also the character who has a sister girlfriend. Maybe sister, maybe girlfriend. Like, we're not gonna comment on that.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sorry. Yeah, he has that. He also has a relationship with Logan. It's canon. It was on the cover. I didn't forget it.
Desad Riddick says it's canon anyway, even if nobody else does.
Yeah, it's there. Like, so I haven't forgotten that. And then the second thing is also, this also illustrates what happens when I think what was he called? Like reproduction police, sex police, like what like,
reproduction police.
Yeah, the sex chief or something, whatever he was called, when they are from one fraction, like, and there's one rule for applies to all, because this is something that Kyle points out. This is very heteronormative, and it also doesn't take into account, like, what happens to all the mutants who are like never dying, no STI, nothing to do. So, and it kind of brings like, and as he's going through that, I'm very happy to see that he's willing to change his view. He's having a crisis because of it. He's not going around and saying that, oh, don't do that, because, he accepts that he was part of a religion who wasn't necessarily, agreeing to all of this, and he's willing to change his mind. To me, that's character growth. I mean, I'm here to declaramentify the entire X series, and let's begin here, with Nightcrawler, and the fact that he's trying to change, it's a very positive thing for me.
And I think that there's nuance in there that at least that I see, that I don't know that everybody's talking about, which is that this old swashbuckling romantic Nightcrawler, he
died. He's dead.
A, he died, but B, it's then layer onto that somebody who knows that one of the rules he's supposed to be following is make more mutants. How does that change somebody who had that approach to romance when he's supposed to be the sex chief who's advocating for making more mutants? And he, as this issue shows, doesn't even fully understand what he wants make more mutants to mean, because there's a very strong argument for that. The resurrection process is making more mutants, and it's not about procreation, right? Yeah. And then to Kyle's comment about heteronormative, I mean, like, there are queer couples that are having kids, even if those couples are, male, female, or any combination, because you can still have children. So, like, the question really becomes, is it being applied in a heteronormative way? It's not to say that it must exclude queer couples. It's saying, is it being talked about in a way that is excluding them because it's being talked about only in this male-female get-together way, when actually it should include male, female, trans male, female, non-binary, and everything in between. So I think that there is a road that we can go down here, and I think somebody's got to push Nightcrawler to get him onto the road, and I don't think it's bad to do that. I don't.
And the thing is, though, this is the first time I found out that make more mutants mean actually make more mutant in the reproductive way. I honestly thought it was by the resurrection protocol all this time.
Really?
I never thought they'd I didn't think they'd commit to showing it. Like, we just have so many babies now.
Well,
we're gonna get
there. But I want to go.
No, I honestly thought all understand that when they say make more mutant, they mean that push
Bring 'em
that
back.
resurrection.
Yeah.
Bring them back. That's how they're going.
I
Because
took it as reproductive.
this is what happens
I
when
took
you're
it. I took it as sexy time.
Yeah,
It's been
I
just
think many
labeled
of us have been
sexy
assuming
time.
it's been sexy time.
The way it was kind of said in a very clinical, or maybe it's like Hickman writing,
Yeah.
very clinical.
Yeah, that's as
You're
sexy
not-
as Hickman
no,
can write it for you.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's
exactly,
exact.
exactly. You know,
Well-
but he tickles all my fancies.
All right, so I want to move us along to a specific sexy time in this issue, which is the sudden relationship between Loa and Mercury. They make their connection heading into this gala. They have a connection at the gala. They want to share an intimate moment with each other, as is their right as legal adults, apparently, at this point. And legal consenting adults, and they, at least in Krakoa, but they're having trouble because their powers are getting in the way. So Pixie ropes in Legion, never going to go well, to give them a psychic connection so they can experience, as Mr. Claremont would say, the ultimate intimacy psychically.
Ugh.
But this goes very badly for them because they get way too deep into this initial moment of infatuation, and it discloses things about each other to each other that ultimately they find very, very traumatic. I want to approach this with a little bit of sensitivity because I'm out there listening to the voices that I think should be listened to on this. And on one hand, you have an X-Men comic explicitly saying this women loves women relationship includes sex, which is not something that Marvel spends a lot of time doing. So great. On the other side, it's saying, here's this first intimate experience between these two characters, and it immediately leads to trauma. So we've minted, I think new, as we've established in previous discussions, LGBTQA character in Loa, an established one in Mercury, and we're showing their first intimate experience on panel, and immediately it goes to trauma, and sex is trauma, especially for queer people, right? I'm not making a judgment on whether it's doing either of those things. I'm presenting you the discussion that this issue is presenting to us. So I want to go around, starting with Tyler, and it'll come back to me because I have a lot of thoughts on this about the scene, their relationship, and their trauma. And if Legion is ever a good relationship coach. Spoilers, probably not.
And
Starting with Tyler.
I mean, I did not read this as they, well, just because they are two females having sex, that leads to trauma. I mean, it is pretty obvious that the trauma is caused by Onslaught. And so I'm a little bit puzzled by that read. But taking a step back, as a as a gay person who came from I wouldn't say super conservative, but a rather conservative environment, which I grew up in Singapore. The thought of having sex with a man when I was growing up is traumatic because it's not something that the society that I know of do remember that when I grew up, I'm that old. When I was growing up, there was no internet. So certain things are not as accessible as it is nowadays. So the thought of having sex with someone which the society that I was growing up in then wasn't approving of is traumatic to me. But that aside, I don't think this was meant to be read as, hey, two girls having sex for the first time. Oh, trauma. And no, that's not what it's saying, right? Because here it is obviously caused by an entity, Onslaught, that is causing something that is supposed to be beautiful becoming something bad, which is basically what Onslaught does. And of course, Legion not having any morality in him knew that was going to happen and used the two girls for it. So that was something which I think is happening in the book. But I don't know what the rest of the panel thinks.
I kind of viewed it more as just the scene that was having this bigger statement on secrets and kind of the pain they cause and what's necessary and what's not, and what's kind of like, things of that nature. And I just don't think it was kind of done super well. So it didn't really land with me at all. This is actually like the flattest part of the issue for me. I just wasn't sure, like, it could just be my issue reading it, but I wasn't sure like what the ultimate point Spurrier was trying to make with the pain from that sexual scene. So I don't know. This is just one of the reasons the issue doesn't work very well for me, because I don't feel like it builds to something that powerful to me.
Fariha?
So the point was that to show that Legion is just as bad as Xavier. Like, he
Maybe,
yelled at
yeah,
Xavier
maybe, yeah.
last 2 issues saying that you're bad, but then he ended up doing pretty much the same thing, not necessarily caring about these characters and their feelings, and then just went because he was after Onslaught. Like, that's what he was after, and he went and got it. One thing I was going to say, though, I'm going to introduce this new thing. There's like a Bechdel test.
Yes.
So now I'm going to introduce Fariha test. Anytime there is a situation with 2 people of marginalized community, imagine, and this is something actually Tyler started, but I'm taking the full credit. Because he actually kind of helped me navigate through these thoughts. So it's a Tyler Fariha test. When it's like a two people of marginalized community is having some kind of trauma or something like that, make them non-marginalized community people, and does the story still works? Like, as far as Legion is concerned, he's not doing this because they are queer. As far as those people are concerned, it's not a sex trauma because they're queer. It's a sex trauma because their powers are not compatible. We have that issue with other characters too. And it's not because, it's a representation matter that, we are showing it and we're not showing it. It's not that. It's just the story. This is the story. This is when I'm talking about that this is kind of like a good way of doing it, because if we are going to hold on to all marginalized community people as like nothing bad can happen to them, there will be no stories with them. They will forever be settled with being the best friends or the people who gets killed and people, all of that. That's one of the reasons it's so exciting with the Mystique Destiny and all of that, even though it is kind of buried the gays trope, but because it works, even if it's not those marginalized communities. So from that point of view, I'm actually shocked when you said there were people who looked at it that way, because that didn't even cross my mind, and I'm saying that as someone who is in the queer community. So it's to me, it didn't even come up as that. To me, I was looking at it, wow, there is like a relationship that is being portrayed that otherwise would have been shown to straight people, but now we are seeing it in a queer way. And then there's like especially the whole thing about like one of them, I'm forgetting which one, not Mercury, the other one, Loa, she was talking about how many kids she wanted and then stuff like that, and then it just like there was like this, it just shows that they are incompatible, and potentially that's all they were looking for that time. But then Legion came in and just decided to be Xavier Jr.
I so much appreciate all 3 of your perspectives on this. I think they're all really, really well considered, and it's the discussion that you can't have on Twitter, right? And so like, and it's hard to have in an article where you don't get this back and forth. This is why X-Men is better when it's read together, and that's inclusive of all of you out there reading. I have 3 things I want to say about this that I kind of wrote some notes ahead of time because I can ramble and I want to really hit these nails on the head. So the first one is trauma is real if somebody is experiencing trauma. And if somebody's been waiting to see women loving women on the page, and the first version of it that they get really explicitly in an X-Men comic ends in a horrible experience for those 2 people, then that's a traumatic thing for them to read. And we have no power to dispute that, even if one of us is a part of that community and we weren't traumatized by that, and that's real. So that's just one thing. And if this had been Rogue and Gambit, who pretty much had this exact interaction,
exactly
to Fariha's point, it would play the same, but it would not be the first time that we've ever gotten to see a young man and a young woman in a Marvel comic have a sexual encounter together. So that's Peter's point number 1. Number 2, I understand the idea of having a certain depiction in a certain comic that is such a turnoff to you as a reader that you've got to drop the book. You have seen Fariha and I have this with sexual assault against women written by male creative teams, and even sometimes female creative teams, or I should say male and female presenting creative teams, that we just tap out. And I've done that many times in the past year. It doesn't matter how good the plot point is. It doesn't matter if the sexual assault really could have happened to anybody in that situation. I could apply all of the Fariha Tyler law to it, and I will still drop the book, because for me, that is a trigger point and I can't keep reading the book. So again, if this is one of your trigger points and you can't keep reading the book after it happened, I completely respect that, because I understand that, because I have that same experience with a different topic. Now my third point, and this is something that Freya I think has said possibly more eloquently than I'm going to say it. If we want relationships of every kind in the page, we can't always ask for happy endings. And not only for happy endings, but happy middles and happy starts. Okay? This is so nuanced. It has so much of the trauma of what young love is. It has so much of the trauma of what sometimes early intimate experiences can bring to you if you're not completely ready to share the things that you're sharing with the other person. It felt incredibly real to me. I had a very opposite experience to Harry reading it. I was like, really like, wow, like this is making me feel something really true and personal in this moment. And I'm really happy that we got to have that with Loa and Mercury rather than Gambit and Rogue, quite frankly. So I accept if it's traumatic to you. I accept if it's the thing that made you drop the book, but I'm also really happy that we got to have these two characters having this experience. And if you can't get past that, then hopefully this will open the door for more representation that can be happier, and so it can be something you can get past. And I hope that we can be here to welcome you back to reading it when it gets to that point.
And unlike council, I'm going to amend my law, just because at one point that Peter pointed out that if it's something that is traumatic, that is something a trigger point for you, forget my law. You don't have to apply that. Drop that shit like it's hot. But if it's not something that trigger pointing, but you are still something that you're passionate about, think of it that way. Try to think of it that way. And that's something I started doing though, because a lot of the things in comics that really pisses me off, and I'm trying to actually see the stories from that point of view, and then trying to see if it actually make any difference. Like 40% of the time it does, So I'm just saying that it's like, so learn from us, council.
Well, let's continue into our discussion of sex on Krakoa, the way of sex on Krakoa. With Stacy X, who I think of the panel, probably Tyler only has experience with previously. Stacy X is a mutant who, using, I think, pheromones. Has the ability to kind of push people a little bit and their emotions. And she has in the past used it in a sexual way. She previously was a sex worker in a brothel, then was briefly a member of the X-Men and Joe Casey's run on the X-Men. And we haven't seen her for a while, except for a little kind of, I think she made like one cameo in an annual or something at some point relatively recently. So she's here, and this whole situation is really hard to unpack. But she's basically created like a cuddled safe space where people can explore their emotions for each other, but also it's an orphanage because people have been leaving mutant babies not just inside gates, which would be the plot point that would seem to make sense, but just randomly, like Moses, on the riverbanks of the island. And on top of all that, to add one more layer onto all this, she is handing out contraception on the island along with all of these other layers of what's happening. Now, I will disclose for the purpose of this discussion that I used to be a peer teen sex counselor. And so I have a lot of actually specific training and certifications in these kind of discussions, but that was a while ago. And it was to talk about them with teenagers. But Stacy X is her flock that she is professing this free love to is everybody on Krakoa. So I come to this from a very specific perspective, which I will try to save until last. So let's begin this time with Fariha, just so we don't always have to begin with Tyler, and talk a little bit about this whole, you can pick apart anything you want, the orphanage, the bower, as we call it, the cuddle lounge, the contraceptives. Please take this from me.
So who is the creator of Stacy X?
Is it Joe Casey?
I think so. I think it's Joe.
I'll look it up for
That
us.
makes sense. I'm sorry.
Yes, I mean Joe Casey
okay.
is.
That makes
Okay.
sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Sure.
I was gonna lose it if you said Claremont. I'm like, no.
No, it was she was
No,
created by
like-
Joe Casey in Uncanny
Okay.
X-Men 399, which is the original X-Corps run of
Okay.
Uncanny X-Men, where the X-Corps name.
So anyway,
originates.
so when she said how about her pheromone power, I'm like, oh, how is that different than Dakin? Like, I'm like, what
Not
happens
really.
when she
No.
and Dakin in the same room?
But I think Dakin mostly makes people interact with him in different ways, but she can make people interact with each other
Yeah.
in different ways.
So they
in a
enhance
different way.
others. Yeah.
Right. So the thing is, a couple of things that kind of came after me is that, okay, because I feel like that she's doing the contraceptive thing because she's kind of tired of all the orphans being left.
Stop leaving these
with her.
babies on me.
Yeah, I can't. I mean, she's just getting to the root of it, which is like, kudos to her. Like, that's actually a very good way of getting there.
Yeah,
Sorry?
that's a good way.
Yeah, that's a good
In
way
way
of
of
getting.
X.
Yeah, in the way of sex, like that's a very good way of getting there. And then I was also kind of how long has Krakoa been? Because what's the gestation period for mutants?
It can't have been 9 months yet.
Yeah,
We're just
because
gonna say it's 9 months. We're just gonna say
That's
it's 9 months
crazy.
just so we
That's
can
actually
make this work.
that's so much more time than I thought. That's,
Yeah.
This is the
that's
first
wild.
wave.
because that's when I was like, okay, so this is the first wave. So the thing is, like, I'm assuming all of this conception happened in the Pox 5 or Pox
At the
6,
original
when
party.
Yeah.
The-
when
the-
Yeah,
when
which add a
everybody
layer
was
onto this.
yeah,
Founders
when
for
sure.
everybody was
For
sharing
sure.
their beers and stuff,
Yeah.
and that's where it happened. Like, and these are the children of the party, like first party, like children of founders party that are being dropped off. I'm like, can we have children of the founder party series? Because that would be nice. That would be something.
Yeah, they should call it Children of the Atom or Youth.
Yeah,
It's like
children of the founders party.
it recontextualizes New Mutants because I'm like, oh, they can't even take care of the small children. They have no time to teach any of you or get you guys out of trouble.
Right.
There are scores of children in the birthing pods.
And it also kind of gives you a thing that there is never going to be a shortage of mutants, so they never have to take care of anyone. Like if they because they have already got the Omega mutant. So the thing is, they don't actually have to spend money on like spend any resources on the new mutant because there is never going to be a shortage of them. That's actually very problematic, and it's like problematic and a very scary thought. And then the thing is, like, she also has it's not just like you're cuddling and everything. If the the people who are like, there seems to be some mutants who are working there as potential as partners and stuff, and our homeboy Fabian Cortez showed up there with a Magneto helmet. Like, that's like, I was like, what is going on? And also it also pointed out the other thing that it did, and that's one of the reasons I love this issue so much, because Lost, who was pretty much lost all this time and is going about, she found a purpose for her. She found a specific job for her that no one was helping her to find. And that also shows that it's like all these mutants that are there could be implemented in different ways, but nobody's taking time to do this. So there was like a lot of like different points that was all done in this one walk and talk. And it just like, I don't know. I mean, I was just blown away by this.
The fact that Krakoa doesn't. Okay, so basically there's a lack of education and structure. And here it also meant a lack of morality and a sense of responsibility, because you can have people giving birth to mutant babies and just leaving them by the side of the road. That is not a good thing. And then you have people basically happily handing babies to Stacy X like laundry and then just walking away. That is
one a week, she says, and there's 7 visible on the panel. But I mean, if it's 1 a week, it could very well be more. There's a minimum of 7.
That's the part which really shocks me here, that they that we went this route, and it in a good way, because I think if we're going to tackle the first law, make more mutants and not talk about sex, not talk about babies, then it kind of doesn't quite make sense here. I mean, I there is a lot to sort of unpack here, but ultimately, because this is a new country, new nation, new society, without laws governing anything, the laws that they have basically just govern what they cannot do, in the sense that, you know, you cannot kill a human, and you have to respect the land. That's it. And that there is no policing. Well, I mean, evidently, self-policing is not going to work here in Krakoa. So you do need policing of some sort, and the fact that they just randomly bring mutant kids and teenagers, unplug them probably from the environment where they have a structure, where they have parents, where they have teachers, where they know the rules of, and put them in an island where there are no rules, where they can live anywhere they want, where they can do anything that they want, and potentially with influence from not so good mutants. This is what you're going to get, and this is probably just the first layer. You're going to see a lot more issues that comes later on, and add to that, knowing that they cannot die, knowing that they're immortal, knowing that if they die because of this strange, say for example, sexually transmitted disease, they don't care, because if I die, I die. I mean, I can come back, like, I just wait for 3 months maybe in the queue, and I just get reborn, good as new. And even if I want, not even good as new, better than new, because of the whole regeneration, basically
4%
increase your
more
power
than you had before.
Yeah.
Well, first I'll come from data. I did some number crunching, and basically in the past decade, Wellington had about 200,000 residents, and 1% of residents yield babies. So basically, if you were to break that out, there are 5 babies on average born per day, every day in Wellington, which is funny to me, because coming from Philadelphia, where like every hospital had, a maternity ward, in Wellington, it's like, I guess not. If only like 5 or 6 babies are born every day in the whole city. But anyway, there's clearly babies being born, I think. Statistically, at this point, even though mostly we're spending our time with X-Men, there's enough random other mutants there that it's just happening. So there's Peter's data corner today. I could talk about this for a whole 40 minutes, and I got to find a way to do it in 3. Stacy X is a character who knows a lot and who has been through a lot when it comes to agency. She's been a sex worker in a way where she did not have agency over her own work. She's been a sex worker in a way where she did have agency over her own work. She understands what it means to manipulate other people's agency, because that is her power. But she also understands how to use her power to accentuate other people's agency and help them explore the feelings they have, which is what she's doing here. What better character is there to comment on the systems that are being set up in Krakoa that are suggesting things without explaining to people the power of their agency in that system? We're saying make more mutants, but Nightcrawler's been sitting on his blue furry ass all this time, and he hasn't even defined for himself what it means to make more mutants. Is it the resurrection process, or is it having babies, or is it some other thing? Nobody knows. Is it Mr. Sinister? Nobody knows. And so, but this rule is out there. Everybody's heard it. They've got it. It's probably inscribed on the gate, and you've got to consent to it as you're coming in, but nobody's explained to people the ramifications of that. Is there maternity care? Is there a daycare? Will your kids have school? Should, as we talked about in another issue, somebody who has a mutant son or daughter bring that mutant son or daughter to Krakoa to grow up here? There's no answers. And I feel like Stacy X understands that they've created this top level ruling of like, well, you make more mutants, and they haven't put any of the structure inside of it, because this is a thing that she fundamentally understands how that causes conflict, right? She's been inside societies that create desire that people don't have a way to express, and she's seen that. And she's also been in situations where people should be able to express their desire, but they're not doing it in appropriate ways, and she's seen that effect too. So I think that to me is fascinating, and it kind of like immediately explains all of the things that she does here. Like, does it make sense that she would be in charge of the orphanage? Yes, because ultimately, like, if you're going to talk about sex positivity accepts the idea that you can have procreation as a result of sex, or sex can be for recreation. Sex positivity also includes safer sex. Like, if you're going to be sex positive, then you're going to have a conversation with everybody who's engaging in sex about what safer sex represents, not only in general, but what it means for them as a person. And Stacy X, I mean, it is smart as hell. I think this is the best decision Spurrier has made in 3 issues. And if you don't agree with me, well, we all come from different backgrounds and I don't have to be right. But based on my background as a sex educator, I was really into this idea of Stacy X being the one to kind of put the lie to all this. How dare you start a society where the first rule is make more mutants and then have no structure, no information, nothing about, like, you know, you're consenting to be a part of this island and consenting to that being one of the rules of the island. And then there's nothing to give you any guidance within that. So this was
Not really a
by
good sell.
far my favorite part of this issue, possibly my favorite part of Way of X all along. I'm all about the Stacy X sex education Way of X. Let's hope that's chapter 2 of this series, and I'll buy every issue.
The other thing to also point out, that one that was very damning, was that the council has not made a decision on how to adopt these kids out.
No,
That's so crazy.
they're saying make more mutants just because they want grist for the mill. They just want to find the next reality warper, but they have no plan for the next beak.
Right,
That's
like,
not
and
good
that's
either.
the thing. That's like, so that's why it's such a genius move. It's like, okay, so you're saying that you are better than them. There's like so many times when you said that, oh, those are human emotion, but you're practically still a human society, and you have not done anything very different. So, I mean, it's kind of cool you all got to Mars, but you are all going to go extinct very soon.
It's like,
Well,
there's
I'm
no
gonna-
wonder Apocalypse liked the society. It's totally up his alley. Where he's just
It
like, yeah, if
really
you
is.
die, you die. I don't really got anything for you.
Exactly. And
Well,
this kind of comes back to that as well, because the first issue we talked about, like the crucible, now it's talking about the actual one of the first thing. I think like Spurrier is like an opposite side of Hickman. It's like I'm going to undo all the rules that you have done. So
I will just say, though, you know, I make notes on every issue, as do I think all of us at this point. And I have this thing that I write down, scope problem, where if you take one thing that could be an interesting plot point, but then you blow it out of proportion in a way that makes it really hard to reconcile with the universe. It's like the difference between a couple of people being venomized and the whole city of New York being venomized. It's much, because then you've got to deal with everybody who's ever lived in New York has been venomized, which then when you later want to make a thing about codexes and people's spines, then you've got to deal with the fact that every New Yorker has a codex in their spine because you let some writer venomize every person in New York, right? So I just think the whole, as Zack Jenkins from Comics XFF called them, the floor babies, because they're found on the floor. I think
I'm loving this tangent.
I think if you're saying that there's one floor baby a week and there's already 7, like, that's approaching a scope problem. And I think this is where Spurrier got a little too like, whoa, like you need to, whoa, we're wacky. Like, you didn't have to go that far. I think there could have been 3, and you could have made the point of like, hey, this is a thing we've got to start thinking about in the society, without saying like, there's a baby being dropped every week. I think this is where Spurrier's need to make us go, ooh, got a little far away from him. We saw this week that Skeety and Ewing made us go ooh without creating problems of the same scope as there's a baby turning up on our doorstep once a week. Well, that's a debate for a different issue. I'm gonna send this around for one last round of comments just about the general onslaughtiness of this. I mean, we have this whole baby scene. We have the things going south. We have a moment of romance between Dr. Nemesis and my darling Dazzler. I don't know how I want to feel about that. But looming
But that was caused by Stacy X.
Yes, it is. But she just gave them a push. They still have their full agency and ability to consent. She gave them a push.
I'm so
act
tired
on your desires
of
and see what happens.
Yeah, I'm so tired of you yelling at Dazzler because you want to have her. Go at it. That's what she said. That's what she did.
All right, and final round, y'all. Legion, Onslaught, the Patchwork Man. Is there anything worth saying before we wrap this up? Starting with Tyler.
It comes off.
Oh, starting with Harry. If Harry's ready.
It just comes off really generic and like kind of a bit just more like random, like mind monster of the week. It felt like it had more kind of like impact and kind of air around it than the last 2 issues. So this just felt like a generic villain from like a comic, like any comic.
All right, Tyler or Fariha?
The thing is though, is like Onslaught, even though I don't know anything about it other than what I saw over here and then what I read in the Wikipedia, it was very much coded as a child of Xavier and Magneto. Like
Make more mutants,
it-
y'all.
Yeah.
yeah, like it was very much coded in like, oh, they were short of saying their love and then just kind of moved away from it. I was like, whoa, where is that coming
Their
from? So
Bond.
it's kind of it makes sense that thematically this is the villain, like or villain or something
Yeah.
that they're after, you know. So the thing is like it's just like because it's something a combination of two people who necessarily don't see eye to eye and
It takes two to
create-
make a thing go
yeah.
right. Tyler.
And
Oh, sorry, were you not done there, Freya?
no, and the last thing I was gonna say though is like I was a little bit about like the Nemesis and Dazzler thing because it kind of gives that whole thing. It's like, oh, the man being mean and still he got the girl.
Right.
Be mad about that, people, because that is
It's like
you
he's
know,
just pulling her pigtails,
and-
and it means he really had a crush on her. Like, come on, are we
Yeah,
a little
and then
older
this
and
is-
better than that now? Possibly.
right, and then. And because the thing is, even if you put different people in it, the reaction would exactly going to be the same. Therefore, Tyler Fariha Law worked, and be mad about that.
All right, Tyler, end it for us.
What are the Zorns doing with Legion?
Yeah, a lot of Zorn
Just a bunch of
action.
oddballs
Yeah.
kicking it together. That's what
I
that
know,
is.
that's
Floating
the name of
around.
it. They're like just floating around, doing nothing, except when they got upset with Fabian. They're like, go away. I think that's what they told Fabian.
I just like it's like of course these three would hang out. Like they have very similar, just interesting energies on the island.
Yeah, it's
I have-
just it's just weird.
I have to say, in terms of cast, I don't know that there's a cast of another book that is. I mean, let's just count down before we wrap up here: Nightcrawler, Pixie, Loa Mercury, Dr. Nemesis, Dazzler, Legion, Zorn, Stacy
Stacy X.
Guest appearances by Fabian Cortez, who's now been in 2 issues, so he might be actually part of this long term.
That's
He's
so
becoming.
wild.
He's gonna be part of
He's
it.
a
Onslaught. And let's not miss that there was a scene of Magneto dancing with Wanda here, as we mentioned,
Yeah, it was
on its
cute.
corresponding scene in Sword. That's, first of all, 12 cast members being juggled, all of whom are very underserved in X-Men books, and all of whom I like a lot. So I continue to root for this book. I think just because this one came off a little flat, a little weird, a little overarching, a little scope problems, a little sexy, doesn't mean that we're on the wrong path. But just announced in the solicits, this is a season 1 of Wave X and is going to culminate in a Wave X Revelations Onslaught special that will be the final chapter of this. And then who knows what the next part will be. But Spurrier swears on Twitter
Yeah.
that there is a next chapter in the Spurrier Wave X saga.
Okay,
But it's not
cool.
necessarily going to be Wave X issue number 6.
If
Oh.
this ends
Oh.
well, like this gets back to better quality. Like I'm fine with this being just like a really
Yeah.
good mini. Like
Oh,
That's
so
fine.
so think. Hold on, Spurrier is going to be back though, right?
He swears
Yes,
that this
it'll
is just the
continue.
beginning of the
Okay,
Spurrier
okay.
of
it'll
X.
continue in some way.
Okay,
yeah.
cool.
Socks. Well, we
Cool,
already had.
cool,
Well, we
cool,
had Socks.
cool.
Okay, that's it, y'all.
Yeah.
When it comes to
Y'all.
discussing Wave X. For those of you who've stuck with us for this discussion and all the other ones, thank you. And for those of you who are looking for other X-Men content, it's all over this channel. Get into it. Because we get together and do this every week. Why, Fariha?
And it's better when it's read together, especially the sexier ones.
Oh boy. So on behalf of myself, Fariha, Harry, and Tyler, I want to thank you for being a part of this discussion. Please comment below on how have you been reading Make More Mutants all this time? Was it more about the resurrection, more about the sexy time, a little of both, or something more sinister? We're interested in your perspective. And until we get to talk to you again, and until we get to read those comments, we very much hope that you are well.